Speaking of the attempt to crack down on people's right to criticize Israel in the United States, the House of Representatives today overwhelmingly passed H.R. 6090 that is essentially designed to adopt a radically broad definition of anti-Semitism and impose it into American anti-discrimination law. So that if you do any of the acts under this new definition of anti-Semitism, and it includes criticizing Israel in ways that the U.S. Congress considers unfair or unjust, you will be deemed formally guilty of the crime of anti-Semitism and can be punished under the law for having done so. And I don't want you to take my word for it. I want you to see what this law says. Because there has been a long-standing effort to try and criminalize criticisms of Israel in the United States, especially on college campuses. And all you have to do is take a look at the law that the Congress, on a massive bipartisan basis, just enacted. 70 Democrats voted no, 25 Republicans, something like that. It was about 90 members of the House who voted no. Mike Johnson led the way in joining with Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, yet again, in supporting the enactment of this legislation. That's one of the gravest attacks, most explicit attacks on the First Amendment right to free speech that we've seen in many years. Regardless of your views on Israel, this should be deeply disturbing to you. So here is the text of the law itself. Quote, 6090, House Resolution 6090, to provide for the consideration of a definition of anti-Semitism as set forth by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, for the enforcement of the federal anti-discrimination law concerning education, programs, or activities, and for other purposes. So just to be very clear, the purpose of this law is not just a resolution to condemn certain criticisms of Israel as anti-Semitic. It is intended to ensure the enforcement by federal administration laws concerning education, activities, and other purposes. Now, this is the kind of thing that is legally barred from doing. And you're about to see that what is barred is expressing a wide range of critical views about Israel. This is the definition that the Israeli government has been advocating all around the West to basically criminalize criticism of and activism against that foreign government. The resolution goes on, quote, it is the sense of Congress that, one, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination on the basis of race, color, and national origin in programs and activities receiving federal financial assistance. 3, discrimination against Jews may give rise to a violation of such title when the discrimination is based on race, color, or national origin, which can include discrimination based on actual or perceived shared ethnicity or ancestry. 4, it is the policy of the United States to enforce such title against prohibited forms of discrimination rooted in anti-Semitism as vigorously as against all other forms of discrimination prohibited by such title. 5, as noted in the U.S. National Strategy to Counter Anti-Semitism issued by the White House on May 25, 2023, it is critical to A, increase awareness and understanding of anti-Semitism, including its threat to America. B, improve safety and security for Jewish communities. C, reverse the normalization of anti-Semitism and counter anti-Semitic discrimination. And D, expand communication and collaboration between communities. Paragraph 4 is definitions. It says, for the purpose of this act, the term, quote, definition of anti-Semitism means the definition of anti-Semitism adopted on May 26, 2016 by the IHRA, of which the United States is a member, which definition has been adopted by the Department of State, and 2, includes the contemporary examples of anti-Semitism identified in the IHRA definition. Now, the bill itself does not provide that definition, the IHRA definition, and that's because anybody who read this definition of anti-Semitism would immediately see what a grave assault it is on core political rights of free speech. Here are some of the examples of what is called anti-Semitism under the IHRA definition that has just been incorporated into American law. And the law itself said that they're not only adopting the definition itself, but also the examples of anti-Semitism provided under this interpretation. Here are some of the things that you are now prohibited legally from doing in the United States. Number 1, accusing Jewish students of being more loyal to Israel or to the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations. So if you look at AIPAC, or you look at the ADL, or you look at members of Congress who are Jewish or evangelical, if you look at Ben Shapiro, and you want to argue, you know what, it seems to me as though they're prioritizing the interests of this foreign country in Israel more than their loyalty to the United States, this is now legal. You are legally barred from saying it. You will be formally and officially accused of anti-Semitism if you make those claims against Barry Weiss or Ben Shapiro or Chuck Schumer or the ADL. That's not allowed. Also not allowed, quote, denying the Jewish people their right of self-determination, e.g. by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor. What if you think that the creation of the Israeli state was wrong and that the Israelis don't have the right to have an ethno-state led by and composed of a majority of Jews? What if you don't find that valid or just? You're no longer allowed to express that opinion because that is something that is now deemed anti-Semitic. Now, you can say it about the U.S. government. You can say, oh, the U.S. government was created by colonizing the land and genociding the Native Americans, and therefore the creation of the United States was unjust. You're allowed to say that. That's perfectly legal. You can say that about any other country you want, too. You can say it about Egypt or Saudi Arabia. I think the creation of those states were artificial and wrong. You can say it about Pakistan. Whatever country you want, just not Israel. Here's another thing you're not allowed to do. Quote, applying double standards by requiring of Israel a behavior not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. So if the Congress or the courts or prosecutors believe that you are making criticism of Israel that you don't consistently apply to other countries, you can now be found to be in violation of federal law by being an anti-Semite. You're allowed to put burdens on China that you don't put on other countries. You're allowed to put them on Peru or South Korea or Norway or any other country you want. You're just not legally allowed to express criticism of Israel that the government might believe is unfair because you're imposing on them a burden that you don't apply equally to other democratic countries. Here's another thing you're not allowed to do under federal law as enacted by the House of Representatives today. Quote, drawing comparisons of contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. Now, the whole point of the Nuremberg trials, and if you haven't read those judgments and the transcripts of the proceedings, I really encourage you to do so. I've written about it many times. The point of the Nuremberg trials, which convicted all kinds of officials of the Nazi regime of crimes against humanity and executed them on that basis. The point of the Nuremberg trials was not that it is a unique evil to commit atrocities against the Jewish people, nor was it that Germans or Christians are uniquely likely to commit atrocities. The purpose of the Nuremberg trials explicitly stated was that the atrocities we saw in World War II are ones that come from human nature, and that we need laws and conventions in place to make it a crime, a war crime, a crime against humanity, for any country to engage in those war crimes. And the Nuremberg trials specifically said the judgment that we are imposing today will have no moral validity, no legal or ethical validity, unless it's applied equally in the future to the countries that now sit in judgment. Meaning that if the United States or France or Russia or Israel in the future commits acts of genocide or atrocities and crimes of humanity, they have to be equally liable to being subjected to those laws that were created after World War II. And yet, under federal law, as it's now passed, you're not allowed to say that what the Israelis are doing to the Palestinians seems similar in kind to what the Nazis did to the Jews. That's a prohibited opinion in the United States. You are not allowed to say that. You can accuse Argentina of acting like Nazis. You can accuse the UK of that if you want. You can accuse the Russians of it if you like. You can accuse the Ukrainians of that as well if you like. You can point out that the Ukrainians have neo-Nazi battalions in it. You can say it about any country you want, including the United States. You just can't say it about Israel. Otherwise, you'll be in violation of federal law. One of the members of Congress, one of the few Republicans who opposed this was Congressman Thomas Massey of Kentucky, unsurprisingly. And in a tweet, he said, quote, the following: Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic minority leader, says at a press conference that he will vote for the Antisemitism Awareness Act. There is some opposition among Democrats to it, though one House Dem tells Axios they expect, quote, a lot of their colleagues to vote for it with Jeffries on board. So yet again, Mike Johnson, says Congressman Massey, encounters opposition from several Republicans to a hate speech bill that many of us believe is a violation of the First Amendment, yet Hakeem Jeffries, the Democratic leader, offers to bail out Mike Johnson again by providing Democratic votes, and that's exactly what happened. Mike Johnson was able to get this bill passed, even though there were 20 members of his caucus opposed to it and 70 members of the Democratic caucus opposed to it on free speech grounds, because, yet again, Democrats saved Mike Johnson. Now, I was actually relieved and happy to see that there were some prominent conservatives who rose up in very vocal opposition to this bill as a grave violation of free speech, including people who are very supportive of Israel, one of whom was Charlie Kirk, who today wrote the following, quote, in response to campus anti-Israeli protests, the House is rushing to vote on a new bill, H.R. 6090. The new bill would, quote, officially define anti-Semitism so the federal government can sue, prosecute, or sanction more people, businesses, and universities for supposed violations of civil rights law. I abhor anti-Semitism, but this bill is flagrantly unconstitutional and an appalling attack on the First Amendment. This bill would make it illegal to compare Israeli policies to Nazi policies. It would make it illegal to describe Israel as racist. It would make it illegal to accuse an American citizen of being more loyal to Israel than to the United States. All of those behaviors might be stupid or repugnant, but they are indisputably protected by the First Amendment. Yet now congressional Republicans are rushing to gut the First Amendment in order to pass a European-style ban on hate speech. I don't know why that's so difficult for conservatives to say, because they've been marching around saying how much they hate censorship and believe in free speech, and yet so many of them now stand by and support what is such a flagrant attack on free speech, basically an announcement that it's more important to shield this foreign government of Israel from criticisms than it is to preserve and protect the free speech rights of American citizens. In other words, they seem more loyal to the interests of Israel than they do to the American people, something that under this law I would not be allowed to say any longer, especially if the people about whom I'm saying it happen to be Jewish. Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire actually posted a similar, even more assertive denunciation of this law, saying that it's a grave attack on free speech. Now, here's the House roll call vote, and there you see it passed overwhelmingly. 187 Republicans voted yes, 21 Republicans voted no, 133 Democrats voted yes, 70 Democrats voted no, and the total was 320 to 91. So you have more Democrats opposing this, and the reason is obvious. They've been far more supportive of censorship when it comes to right-wing speech, and the Republicans have been objecting. But now it's reversed because there's a lot more support for Israel in the Republican Party, so they're happy to limit and legally prohibit criticism of Israel, whereas there's more opposition in the Democratic Party, yet both parties provided overwhelming support for this bill and enabled it to pass by a massive margin. I've been warning for years that the threat to criminalize Israel criticism and anti-Israel activism in the West is the single greatest threat to free speech in the West. Here is an article as just one example that I wrote in The Intercept in February of 2016. There you see the title, The Greatest Threat to Free Speech in the West, Criminalizing Activism Against Israeli Occupation. There is a coordinated and well-financed campaign led by Israel and its supporters literally to criminalize political speech and activism against Israeli occupation. Now, a lot of this was led by Israel that many years ago began criminalizing criticism of their own country, of their own government, attempts to engage in activism, to boycott Israel, to stop the occupation of the West Bank. Here in the New York Times, July 2011, a op-ed entitled "Not Befitting a Democracy." Quote, Israel's reputation as a vibrant democracy has been seriously tarnished by a new law intended to stifle outspoken critics of its occupation of the West Bank. The law, approved in a 47-38 vote by Parliament, effectively bans any public call for a boycott, economic, cultural, academic, against Israel or its West Bank settlements, making such action a punishable offense. It would enable Israeli citizens to bring civil suits against people and organizations instigating such boycotts and subject violators to monetary penalties. Now, it's one thing for, do we have that now? All right, let me put this Matt Walsh tweet on the screen just because it's such a clear example of somebody, a prominent voice on the right, denouncing this law. I can't see it. The vast majority of Republicans just voted, he said, for a bill to criminalize criticism of the Israeli government. If this bill passes, if this passes, you'll be guilty of hate speech if you apply double standards to the government of Israel or accuse it of genocide. This is honestly one of the most insane pieces of legislation I've ever seen. And he's exactly right. The problem is there are very few people on the right willing to say that. Now, as I just showed, Israel was the one that initiated this idea that activism against its occupation of the West Bank should be declared criminal, and it began then pressuring the West to adopt it, and the West began doing so. Here from The Independent, the British newspaper, in February of 2016, quote, Israel boycott ban. Shunning Israeli goods to become a criminal offense for public bodies and student unions. Local councils, public bodies, and even some university student unions are to be banned by law from boycotting, quote, unethical companies as part of a controversial crackdown being announced by the government, the British government. Under the plan, all publicly funded institutions will lose the freedom to refuse to buy goods and services from companies involved in the arms trade, fossil fuels, tobacco product, or Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. Any public bodies that continue to pursue boycotts will face, quote, severe penalties, minister said. Senior government sources said they were cracking down on town hall boycotts because they, quote, undermined good community relations, poisoned and polarized debate, and fueled anti-Semitism. There were actual criminal prosecutions throughout Europe of activists who advocated a boycott of Israel in order to stop the occupation of the West Bank. They were criminally prosecuted as criminal anti-Semites. Here from the Jewish outlet The Forward in October of 2015, there you see the headline, quote, France court upholds a, quote, BDS's discrimination ruling. France's highest court of appeals confirmed earlier rulings that found that promoters of a boycott against Israel are guilty of inciting hate or discrimination. The ruling passed on Tuesday by the Paris-based Court of Cassation confirmed the November 20th conviction of 12 individuals by the Colmar Court of Appeals in connection with their 2009 and 2010 actions in supermarkets near the eastern city of Mulhouse. Here's what they did that got them prosecuted. Quote, the individuals arrived at the supermarket wearing shirts emblazoned with the words, quote, long live Palestine, boycott Israel. They also handed out flyers that said, quote, buying Israeli product means legitimizing crimes in Gaza. They were criminally prosecuted for wearing t-shirts that advocated a boycott of Israel and called for the freeing of Palestine. Is that something you want in the United States? Because whether or not it is, it's what we now have. And this is hardly the first law designed to do that, as we've reported many times before. Many red states, legislatures, and governors, along with Andrew Cuomo in New York, legally banned the state from offering any contracts to anybody who was refusing to sign a pledge that they did not support a boycott of Israel. And we reported on cases such as a speech pathologist in the Austin School District in Texas who had worked with students with speech deficiencies and speech pathologies for many years, had nothing but overwhelmingly positive work reviews. And when it came time to renew her contract for the 10th or 11th year, she noticed that there was an appendix that she was required to sign, and the appendix was essentially a loyalty pledge, a vow not to support a boycott of Israel. But she couldn't sign it because she does support a boycott of Israel. Yet under Texas law, anyone who says that they won't support a boycott of Israel, that's a requirement to employment. If you're not willing to vow that you don't boycott Israel, you cannot get employment in Texas and in 24 other states. Now, fortunately, federal courts that looked at those laws have almost unanimously declared them unconstitutional. And of course, there will be judicial challenges of this new law as well. But it is amazing to watch, as we discussed in the first segment about the protests, where we've had student protests for decades of this kind that were permitted because they were aimed at criticizing and working against the policies of the US government. What's not allowed in the United States is working against the policies of Israel. And by the same token, the Republican Party, overwhelming numbers, despite pretending to be free speech champions for the last decade, joined with the Democrats in an overwhelming majority to formally adopt a definition of anti-Semitism that makes it illegal to express all sorts of criticisms about Israel and Jewish people in the United States that you are free to say against anybody else. So when it comes time to decide whether you believe that American Jews are this besieged, vulnerable victim group and minority, and that, there's so much anti-Israeli sentiment, or whether you want to believe the exact opposite, that American Jews are actually doing quite well. In the United States, they occupy a lot of positions of power, as do other Israel supporters who are evangelicals or national security hawks, and that Israel wields a great deal of power inside the United States. All you have to do is look at the bill that was passed today to see what opinions you are allowed to express and what opinions you're not allowed to express. And therein is the proof of the people in the countries who occupy and exert the greatest power. And they have now used that power to formally attack the free speech rights of American citizens in some of the most glaring and explicit ways that I've ever seen. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.